Timothy Fugit, the minister of music at this church near Childersburg, Alabama, says that it's his deep faith in God that got him through some tough times. His son Cole was born with a rare brain disease.
The spheres in his brain didn't divide properly, so pretty much when you looked at his CT scan, it was nothing but fluid.
But life got even tougher after a seemingly minor incident in December of 2010 when he was pulled over by police and ticketed for an expired license plate tag.
I was coming from the hospital where we'd been staying with Cole there at the hospital. And as I come into town, they had a traffic checkpoint.
Timothy's wife, Christy, had also gotten tickets for 2 traffic infractions, and both were ordered to appear in the Childersburg Municipal Court. The Fugits told the judge about their hospitalized son, and both were found not guilty, as these court documents show. But the judge ruled the 2 still had to pay court costs of about $500. During this period, Timothy Fugit says he was spending so much time at the hospital with his son that he couldn't hold down a job, and with his wife also not working, they couldn't afford to pay the court costs. So their case was turned over to Judicial Correction Services, a private company that collects fines for the city. Fugit says that Judicial Correction Services, known as JCS, told him that he and his wife could be jailed if they didn't pay what they owed.
They would just plain out say, if you can't pay, then they'll issue a warrant for your arrest.
Did that scare you?
Of course.
Fugit says he did the best he could to pay off his family's fines, but says when he couldn't continue to pay and he and his wife missed at least one court date, they were arrested and jailed.
I felt completely like a criminal. I mean, I didn't sell drugs. I didn't break into anyone's home. I didn't kill anybody. I had an expired tag.
So you and your wife were found not guilty of the traffic violations, but still you were being arrested.
We were being arrested, yes. I was very upset, very angry.
They were released several hours later when a relative paid a portion of what they owed. That incident contributed to the Fugits' decision to become part of a lawsuit against Judicial Correction Services and the city of Childersburg. The suit alleges that incarcerating people who can't pay their fines violates the Constitution. Though some experts argue that jail time is legal for those who don't make a good faith effort to pay their fines, in 1971, the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution prohibits imposing a jail term solely because the defendant is indigent and cannot forthwith pay the fine in full.
That's exactly what's happening here.
David Donnelly is the Deputy Legal Director of the Southern Poverty Law Center, a nonprofit civil rights organization that is not involved in the Fugits lawsuit but has represented others in similar situations. Donnelly estimates that 1,000 people every month are going to jail in Alabama because they cannot afford to pay a fine.
Everyone thinks that debtor's prison is over. It's behind us. It isn't. As a matter of practice and in some cases policy, the courts ask one question: can you pay the fine? If you can't, then you have to what's called sit it out in jail. That is unconstitutional unless the court first conducts an inquiry into whether they're indigent and the causes for their inability to pay the fine. Routinely, what's happening here is that no such inquiry is undertaken.
Did anyone in the court ever try and assess whether or not you could afford to pay the fees?
No, sir. It was just pass and go. It was really fast.
Collecting fines is more important than ever because many cities face budget shortfalls, but these same cities don't have the personnel to collect the fines. So increasingly they turn to what are known as private probation companies. That's where Judicial Correction Services comes in.
We were approached by the probation service. They found a niche.
Childersburg officials declined to speak with us, so we met with Stephen Boone, the finance director for Mountain Brook, a city neighboring Childersburg that also hired Judicial Correction Services. Its court is one of over 1,000 in at least 12 states across the country that's hired a private probation company, according to Human Rights Watch. Judicial Correction Services collects fines at no cost to the cities it works for.
They're helping us to become more efficient, and they're helping us to ensure that we don't get a backlog of delinquent accounts that may ultimately get so old and people move away that we'll never collect it. So I think it's a win-win.
I think private probation has a role.
Republican State Senator Cam Ward is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and has been following the growing trend of private probation. Not only does Ward support the use of such companies, he believes the industry will continue to grow.
Now, I will tell you this, I think the trend of privatization in the area of collections, I think that will continue all across the country until you see a concentrated effort to put more money into the collection services that the state runs.
But these private debt collectors are by definition in business to make money. And even though they don't charge the city anything, they charge offenders, like Timothy Fugit, $45 a month plus a $10 startup fee until a debt is fully paid off. This on top of the $500 in court costs that Fugate already owed.
Can you tell me if you were making an effort to pay these off?
We were, yes, sir. Even though, I was making the effort, I wasn't getting very far with it. It was still all these fees adding up, so I wasn't gaining much ground.
Still, 4 months after their initial court date, documents show that the Fugates scraped together enough to pay off almost $300 of the $500 they owed in court costs. But then things went from bad to worse. In June of 2011, their son Cole died. A month later, their house that had been in the family for generations was foreclosed upon. At this point, the Fugates say that they were consumed with grief and were missing their appointments with JCS. Timothy says he explained the difficult circumstances his family was under, but he says the JCS probation officer wouldn't work with him at all.
It was all at one time, just hit us all at once, and I explained it all to them, but it was either pay or go to jail.
Being threatened with a jail sentence, did that help you to come up with the money?
It helped me to try a little harder, but, still, as the old saying goes, you can't squeeze blood from a turnip.
Over the next 8 months, with JCS monthly fees adding up, the couple missed at least one court date each and were fined additional fees for failure to appear. Then, warrants for their arrests were issued. By the time of their arrest in February of 2012, the Fugates had racked up $2,500 in additional court fines. Remember, all this began with 3 traffic violations for which they were found not guilty.
If you would have come up with the money that you owed Judicial Correction Services and you would have shown up for all of your appointments with them and to the courts, none of this would have ever happened.
You're right. It wouldn't have happened, but, the situation I was in, I was doing what I could do, Had a dying child, no steady job at that point because we were back and forth to the hospital. I was doing what I could do.
David Donnelly of the Southern Poverty Law Center says that people like the Fugates end up paying JCS off for years because of all the additional fees and added fines they often accrue.
They're in a system in which all they are doing is paying JCS, Judicial Correction Services, on a monthly basis for the privilege of staying out of jail.
We asked legal scholar and Columbia Law professor Jillian Metzger to take a look at the lawsuit and to evaluate the constitutionality of private companies like Judicial Correction Services collecting fines for cities like Childersburg. She has no involvement in the case.
Part of what due process requires is that you have an impartial decision maker. And if the company that is imposing the fees and continuing your supervision has a financial interest in your staying under supervision, then that really calls their impartiality into question, and they have a financial motive.
Metzger also says the court is obligated to provide alternative options for an individual to pay off a debt to society, such as community service, if he or she is indigent.
If you're not paying because you're just too poor to pay, then the court can't automatically imprison you. They have to do an investigation about alternative arrangements in order to allow you to work off the fine in some other way.
We reached out to JCS multiple times for an interview, but we never received a reply. But on its website, JCS says the lawsuit is baseless. We also tried unsuccessfully several times to ask the mayor of Childersburg, B.J. Meeks, if he was satisfied with the services JCS had been providing the city, but City Hall never responded to our request. So we went to a city council meeting to ask.
After speaking to some of the residents here, they feel like they are being threatened with a jail sentence if they don't pay their fines, and I wonder if you had a comment.
Well, then that's up to the court system.
Is it not unconstitutional to jail somebody who cannot pay their fee?
I don't know. There again, if the court system is satisfied with it, under state Supreme Court jurisdiction, and I know that we contract with one of the many cities in Alabama that uses contract service. And the reason being because of not having the amount of personnel we have.
Even State Senator Cam Ward, who supports the private probation industry, has concerns.
And what's currently in existence is almost like the Wild West. There is no regulation. If you're going to create a system that, quote unquote, is a debtor's prison, all you're doing is inviting yourself to a federal lawsuit is what you're doing.
And it still flows.
As for the Fugates, after being charged an initial court cost of about $500 for traffic violations, of which they were found not guilty, court documents provided by the Fugates' lawyers show that they've paid almost $1,300 to the Childersburg court. It's a number that doesn't even include all the additional monthly fees they paid to Judicial Corrections Services, a figure the city of Childersburg declined to provide us due to pending litigation. Timothy Fugate says that his family still owes more money to Judicial Corrections Services. How much? He's not sure. He says JCS stopped contacting him after the lawsuit was filed. While the Fugates case is still pending, since our story aired last spring, the Childersburg Municipal Court recently issued a standing order stating that in no case shall an indigent defendant be incarcerated based solely on his or her inability to pay fines. Fugate's attorney also told NewsHour that hundreds of Childersburg residents no longer have warrants out for their arrest and have been taken off Judicial Corrections Services roster. In a statement to NewsHour, the city of Childersburg says it is pleased with the actions taken to transform the court, which was the subject of some negative press attention, into a model for other courts to follow. And Childersburg is not alone. The city of Montgomery, that also hired Judicial Corrections Services, has agreed to new policies to avoid jailing people who are too poor to pay minor fines. In November, a federal court approved a settlement for plaintiffs who were suing the city alleging they were unlawfully jailed. The settlement requires Montgomery to stop contracting with Judicial Corrections Services.